Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Sam, for the intro. My name is Alana Gluck. I am Delivery and Engagement Manager in the Built Environment team at Connected Places Catapult. And today, I'm really pleased to be hosting a panel discussion on places that are fit for the future. And specifically, we're talking about shaping the housing and built environment, the housing sector and the built environment for social and environmental impact, and how we can leverage net zero interventions for broader social and environmental outcomes. So there's no secret that we have a housing crisis in the UK, and there are lots of questions around the social and environmental implications of mass-scale house building. We also have a built environment that has a massive carbon footprint, so there's lots of challenge, but lots of opportunity. And so I'd like to introduce our wonderful panel of speakers. First, we have Charlotte Hopkinson, who's Head of Sustainability and Corporate Social Responsibility at Granger PLC. Next, we have Rob Chesworth, who's Head of Strategic Land at the Crown Estate. And we also have Dr. Mike Pitts, who is Deputy Challenge Director for Transforming Construction and Net Zero Heat with Innovate UK. So thank you, speakers, for joining us for this conversation. And to kick things off, would each panelist just introduce themselves briefly and a bit about their role, and also why addressing public health and climate resilience is crucial in the context of your work related to housing and the built environment. So let's start with you, Mike.
Afternoon, everyone. Keeping along well? God, come on. It's an interactive session, this, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Afternoon, everyone. That's good. I'm glad you're all there. So yes, I work at Innovate UK, and as you get older, your job titles just get longer. But one of the principal area of focus right now for us is around the challenge of heat. So moving off gas for heat in buildings, for heating space and water in buildings. We're part of the Net Zero program, the biggest part of the kind of future economy thinking within Innovate UK. For those who don't know, I should probably start there. Innovate UK is the UK government's innovation agency. We're there to remove barriers to businesses innovating so we can grow the economy faster. And in this space, really, the retrofit challenge is big. It's a big issue. We're really concerned with how we can prosper from the UK being the fastest transitioning economy to net zero. That's kind of the stated aim there. And so within this, we're focusing on quite a lot of the kind of systemic challenges about that switch. And as we've dug deeper and deeper into this area, we're seeing more and more of a link with other things like health. I mean, I'm teasing it a little bit, but really the link between building physics and health of people who live and work in buildings is not widely appreciated and not deeply understood. So there is actually a big opportunity there, and that's probably what we're really going to talk about from me today.
Thanks, Mike. Rob?
I don't have a funny introduction. Nice to meet you all. Rob Chesworth. I work at the Crown Estate. I've been at the Crown Estate for about 15 years. The Crown Estate, for people that don't know, is a national business accountable to Treasury with an independent board. We own land and property across the country. I can describe a bit of that later if it's interesting. And we manage the seabed on behalf of, in England, Wales and Northern Ireland, on behalf of the nation. I suppose for as long as I've been here, we were sort of analogous to a listed REIT, and we had this seabed thing stuck on the side of the business. And most recently, it's become a transformative opportunity to serve the national interest, and it's an incredibly interesting organisation to work in. For a long time, I ran our strategy team. I've most recently joined our regeneration business. The Crown Estate has sold land to developers for a long time. Old business model, old strategy. New strategy is how does the Crown Estate contribute towards some of the pressing national interests that we're here to talk about today. Strategy focused on 4 things: net zero, regional prosperity and growth, the biodiversity crisis, and sustainable financial returns to the Exchequer. 100% of our net profits get paid to the Treasury every year. Maybe the last thing I'll say is we have a pipeline of about 20,000 homes, some 7 or 8 million square feet of employment space across the country. But beyond that, an enormous opportunity to try and do things differently. And I say that not least because with all the humility in the world, we haven't been doing development in the regions for very long. And if we try to be like the incumbents, we'll get eaten alive, and nor should we. And I think that presents an enormously exciting opportunity to innovate, and we can talk a bit about that today.
Thanks, Rob. And Charlotte.
Hi everyone, Charlotte Hopkinson. I work for Granger and we are the UK's largest listed residential landlord. So we're coming at this very much from a resident wellbeing and affordability perspective. We provide mid-market homes to rent, and our purpose is all about renting homes, enriching lives. So really it's incredibly important for us that our residents can afford to live in their homes because they're efficient to run, and part of that is also contributing to our net zero agenda, but also that our residents are healthy and well and active members of their local community. And we feel that it all ties up together, both the sort of the S and the E in ESG, as it were, in terms of that public health and net zero collaboration.
Thank you. And Charlotte, I want to pick up on that point of working with residents. So how do you figure resident well-being and health into an overall strategy to manage your estate?
So it starts even when we're sort of designing a building, and actually we're really lucky that we've got quite a lot of scale now, so we're able to look at existing usage of our buildings, get feedback from existing residents and feed that into how we design our new developments. And that goes through everything like focus groups to customer surveys, organising regular events for our residents and then getting feedback on those. And all of that feeds into the design and then the operational strategies that we use. I think it's really, really important to get input from residents and get their feedback. So even with our sort of greener living campaign that we have, that's been led by resident feedback and also suggestions from our colleagues who are based at our sites as well, because we have large resident services teams that are there on site day to day supporting our residents. But really we have to listen to what's important to them and then plan our strategies for both design and operation around that to ensure that they're maximising the opportunities that we're providing.
So I really like the point about listening to what's important to the residents, and you have a lot of residents to listen to. Now, Rob, I want to ask you the same question, but you don't just have residents, you have the government as a primary beneficiary. So how do you manage kind of working out public benefit versus residential benefit for people who live in Crown Estate residencies and navigate that all with also commercial buildings?
I'd have preferred Charlotte's question. Maybe let's start there. So, Crown Estate's Crown Estate's governed by the Crown Estate Act of 1961, and we're tasked with maintaining and enhancing the value of the estate, the income derived from it, but with a number of important provisions around good management. And good management gives you enormous latitude to define, in modern terms, what does holistic value look like. And so Treasury's got the Green Book and the UN SDGs and others, and so we've come up with a holistic framework for value creation that is true to the spirit of our obligations under the Act, but represents how modern investors and communities think about value. So hopefully that answers the first question. So there is no tension between our mandate into the Exchequer and a holistic value proposition that we're trying to create through a regeneration business. What we don't have is loads and loads of existing housing stock. We've got an opportunity to build some. And so we have some pilot projects in the market now looking at sort of co-production and co-design. If you think about your principles for sustainability, like any developer, carbon's quite straightforward. What operational embodied carbon target am I going to pick? We've picked LETI, for example, and you can pick a number and you innovate around it, and it's dead hard, but we're going to have a go. On social impact, we thought a bit about, do we turn up and go, we're here for healthcare, and that's not what listening means. So we've worked with people like the Centre for Thriving Places and the Quality of Life Foundation to codify principles that are about engagement that goes beyond consultation and maybe trends towards co-design and co-production. So how do you develop an understanding of community need and bake it into your master plan? And so we're going to have a go at doing that on a small scale first. We've got 3 sites in the market now. One of them particularly is focused on co-production and co-design, and we'll see how that goes, and the intent is to try and scale that methodology. That's the idea, at least.
So I like the idea of co-production and co-design in a residential establishment. And Mike, I want to pick up on net zero heating and also kind of taking an innovative approach using communities to drive that. So where has Innovate UK done work to kind of further that agenda?
Well, first of all, I will say, Rob's on the plane just how thoroughly the Crown Estate thinks about things like carbon. So, you know, actually having a true science-based target and almost a carbon budget that they're using. So thinking about the embodied spend as well as the saving, which if we did it everywhere, would be quite scary. You know, just to stick to the UK government's house building target would use up all of the UK's carbon budget pretty soon. So we've got to think about better ways of doing this. So retrofit is going to play an important role. I think in terms of thinking about things like co-creation and working with others, what we really care about is that, and maybe keeps me awake at night a lot, is that I am a white, middle-class, middle-aged man. And a lot of my colleagues are, and I am paranoid that we come up with solutions that work for us. Anyone got an idea how many prepayment meters there are in the UK? Anyone want to guess? Good guess? Higher. Getting on that way, 7.4 million homes on a prepayment meter. Your app is not going to solve their heating problem. And it's people with that lived experience that I think really concerned to try to work with and come up with solutions that really work for people who have got completely different priorities than just improving carbon. And I think we think health is part of the bridge into that. We are early in our understanding in this stages. Thankfully, there's other programs across Innovate UK that we can draw on in this space, including some great work being done here with CPC, where we can start to pull all that together, because we have to retrofit all 30 million buildings in the UK over the next couple of decades. If we're going to do it, let's make health an outcome, but let's make sure that these solutions are usable and don't drive greater inequality, because that's another one of my big fears. So yeah, but there's a real opportunity for big social improvement here.
I think it's a sort of mindset thing as well, right? Like, how many other people have got a latent market of 30 million? If you think about it that way, it's much more interesting than a big problem to get solved.
But is there anything else that you could do that will drive social improvements, so reduce things like fuel poverty and health inequality, as well as driving, you know, local regeneration, as well as making us more energy secure as a nation? You know, there's so many things we can do in one go here, but it seems to be, I don't understand why retrofitting homes is so unsexy. Because I find it really sexy.
So talking about its sexiness, what do you think are let's say, the major challenges, but also the low-hanging fruit? What can we do now to kind of drive retrofit better?
I think a big part of it is to start to tell better stories about the benefits. So at the moment, what I see a lot of is teaching people to ask about payback. No one asks about payback on a kitchen renovation in their home. You know, how many times do I have to use this before it's worth it? You know, but that's how we're selling these kind of improvements, rather than saying you will sleep better, your children are less likely to develop asthma, you know, you'll be able to live independently in this home for longer. You know, there's lots of things that get improved through doing a good quality improvement to your home, where you deal with the fabric and the carbon, the decarbonising your heating. You will have, you know, predictable energy bills for decades. You know, I've bought into a solar farm project. For the rest of my life, I know what my energy bills are going to be. The rest of my life. Hoping I live long enough. If I don't, I can bequeath it to my son. But that's, you know, these are some of the things we're just not talking about. You know, and it's sold on all the wrong things. So I think there's a mind shift there, but also collecting the data to support that. So there's a role for science across the wider UK research and innovation landscape. We can do some of that. But it's bringing together people who've got aligned incentives. So those trying to do preventative healthcare, working with those who are out there actually doing things that will make a difference to health.
So, and I want to bring it to you, Charlotte, because you do work with residents. Are their decisions around their home or the work that you do in their homes driven by ideas around their health and well-being, and have you been able to bring in outside expertise from, say, the health sector to help drive that change?
I think health and well-being is much more resonant with our residents than environmental sustainability, certainly. I think one of the things that they respond really well to is wider community initiatives. So whether it's a health initiative happening in the area where they live, whether it's a volunteering project, anything that gets them kind of out feeling part of the wider community and sort of getting to know each other, getting to know what's relevant to them in the local area, I think we really see more results from. Actually, the area that our residents tell us is most important to them is waste and recycling. So that's much higher up for them than energy saving, even, for example. So we think that's really interesting because it's very visible. You can see waste piling up and you can see how easy it is to change behaviour and make a difference. And I think that's what we need to get across with health, with some of the more difficult concepts around sort of energy saving, that they need to really see the impact in order to really engage with it. But I do think, yes, definitely bringing external stakeholders in. I mean, even we have community policing teams that we're now working with to help our residents understand about safety in the local area. On health, I think there's some great opportunities working with local authorities and bringing them into our buildings and helping get our residents involved in some of those projects. So I definitely think there's more we can do in that space, but certainly bringing it to life and helping the residents see the impact they're having is what's really critical.
So I want to ask a question to the entire panel. We'll go down the line. So we've talked a lot about kind of the state of play, but what are some notable trends that you see that are making positive impact in retrofit for health and climate resilience? Starting with Mike.
Oh, so it's not with me?
Yeah, down the line.
It's amazing how fast we forget, though, isn't it? I mean, in the setup to this, COVID was mentioned, right? So, how quickly we've forgotten the importance of ventilation indoors. It's only a few years ago we were obsessed with it. And I think, that's where we start to pull the two things together. So, I think I'm going to bang on quite a lot about the health aspects of it. But in terms of the switch towards retrofit now, we are seeing an increase. There's probably more demand out there than it can be met. And that's one of the wider challenges for that sector. But I think we're getting close to that kind of tipping point that we started to see with other, net zero technologies like electric vehicles. Going to very soon get to that point where people start seeing, and we were talking about this earlier in our session, is my neighbour's got this, they love it, I've been in their home feels nicer than mine, I want that. And then we'll really start to see that tip in demand. And I think it is very experiential. I think we do need to expose this to people. A lot of the drive is actually coming in non-domestic buildings. So some of the most interesting stuff that's been done is in things like office blocks or even into schools. So if you can, and the technology's kind of there now to detect a lot of those building physics parameters that do affect your health, and they affect things like your productivity. So, if you own a large office building, so you're using a large office building and you have a large workforce, and you can tell what that building's doing to the productivity of your workforce, that's a lot of money. And that's driving changes in how, the provision of workspace, but right the way through into things like schools. There's a lot of evidence building up now to help that kind of cognitive stamina, I suppose, for children. Having a healthy learning environment makes such a big difference. Why wouldn't we do it? And I think a lot of the learnings from those kinds of pilots are now going to start more and more to come into how we tackle retrofits in homes. Because I said there's two sides to this. First of all, that can help drive demand. On the flip side, there's a lot of people having it done to them, like residents, in social housing. And what we really want to do is make sure we're not giving them adverse effects from bad retrofit. Making a building too airtight. And that does come down to how they then use that their home as well, and whatever's been fitted in there. because there's always a usability side to it as well. So again, there's an innovation opportunity there that we see is quite important.
So Rob, same question about different trends, but I also want you to maybe pick up Mike's point around non-domestic buildings being kind of ahead of the game in terms of retrofit. Do you have experience of that at Crown Estate?
Well, I think retrofit probably more for Charlotte than me. We build, talk about new build and innovations around new build. I mean, not really, Alana, to be honest. I'm too far removed for anything other than anecdotal views, so I'll keep it brief. What I would say though is we're 9 million square feet of heritage real estate in London, and something that strikes me about that problem, which sort of touches on some of the stuff that Mike talks about, scalability. So one of the things the way we try and chunk up our net zero trajectory is like the sort of complexity versus scalability thing, right? So if we can find solutions where you can solve without having vacant possession, for example, that's good. Or if you can get vacant possession of a building once. And I say that, and the logical extension to housing is, I think one of the biggest challenges we've got scalability of SMEs. So we've got these 2 net zero demonstration projects in the market with some ridiculous innovations. I'm really proud of where they're at, and we're still now 9 or 12 months out from planning, but the designs are exceptional. They'll be sort of against UK leading standards. But you're talking about businesses that have pipelines of 2, 5, 800 homes. And the business, Charlotte knows this better than me, the business model of the at-scale operators is enormously disincentivized from adopting many of those innovations, and the policy environment hasn't caught up quickly enough. And so I see really interesting green shoots. I think there are some exceptional innovations that we could adopt. But there are a number of market or policy barriers in place that people like us that have got the scale and maybe a more interesting business model, or can think more competitive cost of capital, etc., or patient capital, can perhaps take a different view.
So what are those policy barriers?
Well, so, what's not terribly controversial? You take the Future Home Standard, for example. There's a pretty significant level of industry, and I'd say even from the house building industry, right? Like, doesn't go far enough. Is fundamentally, and Mike knows this better than me, fundamentally misaligned from the UK's 2050 objectives. So why don't we have carbon budgets baked into emergent policy? Why isn't there more policy around house building or planning that is codified against the UK's binding targets? I say it makes no sense, but it probably does. But it's frustrating, and as a consequence, we've adopted emerging emerging standards that we hope will become best practice, but they're really hard. And because they're really hard and they're not codified within policy, the adoption's pretty fragmented, and you end up dealing in a pretty small pool of people. So I think that's the most substantial one. We haven't seen much planning reform for a long time. There is an enormous amount of prevailing policy that relates to the house building sector, and people can take their own views as to why that is, but the emerging standard for new build residential property is miles away from where it needs to be in the context of the UK's 2050 objective.
Yeah, so to support Rob, it's absolutely the case. The standards that we are slowly, glacially moving towards are nowhere near best practice, and that saddens me. You saw me as I came in this morning all angry. That was because I've decided to respond harshly to a bunch of house builders resisting some of this change. I'm putting disinformation out about it, because it's, new builds almost, it isn't really a challenge. I'll say that. So we had a program.
It's on embodied carbon.
Not long on body carbon. Yeah, I'll come to that next actually. Yeah, big problem. So, but in new build, we had a program called the on active buildings. The idea that buildings become an active part of the energy network rather than a load that just sits there taking energy out of it. So they can generate, manage, and store their own energy. And I say energy because it could also be in the form of heat. And really what we concluded in that is if you get in early enough in the design process and think about simple things like orientation, not trying to dust this stuff on after you've got planning permission, you can build active buildings for the same or less than you build buildings today. Because when you take a whole value model of a development, you're avoiding things like connecting up the gas grid and all those prelim works, and you don't have to upgrade the electricity network to quite the same level because these homes have got a pretty low demand. Although they're connected, they're largely dealing with their own energy. And that offsets that small increase in capital cost, which is a lot cheaper when you've new build than at the end. It's an absolute scandal that we are still building homes today that will have to be retrofitted in the next 20 years.
It's a joke.
It's just, it shouldn't be happening. You know, if there's one policy thing you could do, it would be that. But the embodied carbon thing is the real challenge.
It's dead hard.
Yeah, we did, so really quickly, going back to the schools thing, we funded some work with the DFE to generate a design guide called Gen Zero, so right the way through to kind of Reba Stage 3 to say, these are the principles by which we would build a proper net zero school. And completely, including embodied carbon. It's really tough. You know, it does, when you get past LETI standards, but it does need you to use a lot of domestic UK timber for it to work. There isn't a lot of UK domestic timber of engineer.
I don't know how conversant people are with, these are just numbers, right? But like, the house building sector builds to about 800 CO2 per metre squared, so about 800 I think, the house building sector. The UK's 2050 trajectory is below 300, and the best standard you can find, and most standards in the UK don't have an embodied carbon target, which is weird. The best standard you can find is at 300, and that is honestly really, really difficult, and we're struggling to do it over 200 homes, but we're going to have a go. I don't know that the business model is scalable, but you know, we've got about as competitive cost of capital as you can get. We can invest over long-term horizons, we can support SMEs, like, we've got pretty favourable starting conditions. And it's really difficult. And I suppose two things I'd add, now you've got me going. Two things I would add. Public funding is reasonably, like the public definition, if Homes England colleagues were here, I think they would agree with me. Right? The definition of viability in a public funding context is reasonably substantially misaligned from many of the things Mike's just outlined. So there's not an enormous amount of public funding that supports the level of innovation or bridges the gap with people who've got less wiggle room around their cost of capital. And then the other thing I would say is we've got a road and a roundabout on one of these small projects, and we've asked for low carbon solutions to the infrastructure. And if we put low carbon infrastructure in, it probably won't get adopted, and because that's hard too. So there are some substantive national policy barriers, and then there are incremental hurdles along the way. And when you add all that up, it's not surprising that the pace of innovation is more limited than we need it to be.
So Charlotte, I want to come to you about some of the trends you see that have impacted your work now, but what you see kind of having impact going forward.
I think going forward, we definitely need to focus more on flats. I mean, there's obviously a big piece of work looking at heat pumps and the fabric first approach. You can't do fabric first very well in flats, if at all. So we need to look at what those solutions look like and how they work without fabric first approaches, because we have a lot of people who live in flats, and you also have challenges around maintaining things like space standards and other quality of life impact areas whilst trying to adopt clean heat. I think there are some really exciting technologies. I think some of the smart technologies around water heaters, so heaters that only heat up the water when it's predicting you will be ready to have your daily shower if you have a shower around a similar time every day. I think that's really exciting, and they're not too much more expensive than a traditional boiler or water heater would be. So I think things like that need a lot more focus. And really, I think we need to focus on adopting solutions that work for all the different areas of the market. Like the solutions that work well in social housing might be very different to the ones that work well in owner-occupied properties. And I think we need the associated policy environment that supports that and ensures that we're not just focusing on retrofitting one small subsector of residential. We're offering solutions that are applicable across the whole sector.
Thank you. I want to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions if there are any. Please feel free to put your hand up. Yes. 1 second, we're getting a microphone.
Hi. You talk about fabric first. Could you say a bit more about what that means and what the implications are?
Yeah, so this is about improving the level of insulation in the building so that it's optimised for the heat pump to be able to work and provide lower temperature heat and hot water to the building. So in a flat environment, it's very difficult to do insulation, whether that's because there's flats along, above, below, alongside it, and you might need to get consent, or you might not be able to get into the walls to insulation, for example, or even just to maintain space standards, you might not be able to put any additional insulation into the floor, for example.
Big challenge. we have funded some retrofit projects where they've kind of put skin around the outside of the building. Doesn't always deal with the floor stuff. But at the same time, taking the opportunity to add on a bigger balcony space and things like that. So you've got to think about those benefits to the residents.
So moving forward, what do you see as the biggest barrier to implementing a large-scale retrofit?
That's a great Who wants that one?
Well,
Go on.
I guess everybody here, I think, is reasonably has a similar view on the sustainability agenda. I would say it's an awful generalisation, but you wouldn't be here if you didn't, I don't think. And I think the barriers to entry for consumers are way too high. Like, technology choices are difficult, finance choices are difficult, supplier choices are difficult. So whilst there might be a compelling consumer proposition, the route to market's incredibly intimidating. And it needs democratizing, and it needs digitizing, and it needs making way more accessible. I think that's a substantive barrier, but I also think it's an enormous opportunity for somebody, because there's a latent market and a bunch of positive. It's a market with a load of tailwinds, with a few barriers that need overcoming. It should be more doable than it seems to be.
What's really exciting working in this space over the last few years is just the emergence of aggregators. Of demand, as I call them, aggregators. So you've got energy companies saying, oh, we want to provide the solution for you. You've got local authorities doing really brilliant local-based stuff. Then you've got some of the innovative businesses coming in, like the Hiki guys, former Apple, director involved in running that one, saying, let's do that in, that whole step space, because there is a wall of capital. There is a lot of funding ready to come into this space. If you've got a mortgage loan book, you'd love to be able to reduce the carbon of that loan book, because you can borrow money at a lower rate. But you need certainty that what you pay for someone taking a green mortgage or green loan is actually delivering the improvement they want. So a lot of that is about the measurement. So we've got EPCs are not, they're a guess, they're an estimate. There are a lot of assumptions. We need harder data, so quite a bit of our work is getting good data on the condition of buildings now, and very good data, very quick methods to verify that improvement. Because once you can start to verify that improvement, then you can start to loan against it. And they want to do it, because imagine you've got a portfolio book, you can bring in lower cost money, loan out to that. You will not only reduce the carbon of that loan book, you'll increase the value of that loan book, because those homes will be worth more, and the people you're loaning the money to are less likely to default, because they start to get steady bills. So it's the drive is kind of there. It's all coming together. So the variance in UK building stock is part of the challenge in getting that data, that really data-driven approach to it. So we focus a lot on that, and then the skills, which I'm not going to get into. Unless Charlotte's going to.
Well, we're just about at time, but I'm going to ask each of our panelists a tricky question. So it's the year 2050. What is housing in the built environment like in the UK? Starting with Charlotte.
I think we might have a bit of a two-tier system where we've got some really efficient, low carbon, low embodied carbon newer homes. I think we are still going to have a bit of a retrofit issue, and unfortunately there will be areas of the market that we haven't been able to bring up to those standards, and I really hope it's not the more disadvantaged members of society living in those homes when that time comes.
Rob, same question. It's 2050. What do you see in your crystal ball?
I'll try and not be dystopian. I think we've talked a lot about carbon, and my hope is that the market sees, there's a very homogenous product now, by and large, and my hope is that the state builds more property and the conditions exist such that there is more innovation in the type of housing stock and models for living in the UK. And that means, some inspiration from Europe, for example, or from Asia, but more multi-generational. Why isn't there a discounted rent product that's widely available? More intermingling of communities and tenures. And I think all of that would do the social fabric of the country an enormous good. I don't know quite how you tackle the challenge that Charlotte's just raised. I think affordability is a big issue, but I think if you tackle it as a policy compliance issue, it's always going to be challenging. I think if there's more variety in housing stock, then you give yourself more avenues to solve that problem.
Thanks, Rob. Now, Mike, it's 2050. What does your crystal ball say?
That I'll be retired? Probably not.
Looking after your heat pump.
We'll be off gas. Gas will be dead by then. There's no way. I mean, the gas prices will go up and up. Supply will be harder and harder. We'll have been forced to move off it. So we'll have a very electrified housing stock on the whole. I suspect there probably still will be a bit of patchwork. It's a shame. But also, I do believe by then we'll have a much better understanding of how important our homes are to our health. And people will prioritise that over other kind of upgrades to their home. Don't forget, 3 million. There's 3 million kitchens and bathrooms done every year. We're only talking about doing 1 million retrofits a year for the rest of the time. So, people loan money to do that. I think people might start to prioritise other kinds of upgrades to their home because that's much better for them and their families.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for participating. Thank you all for being in the audience. And we'll conclude there. Thank you so much.